Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm your host, Dave West, CEO here at Scrum.org. Today's podcast is focused on how Agile helped ensure that a multi-million-dollar project was successful and how you can accelerate value in large programs. That's always a thorny topic, right? Huge programs, not necessarily going to be successful, but I'm very lucky today because I've got a bit of an expert on the subject, Rahman, PST, and CEO of Fractal Systems. Fractal, the company that he leads, have engaged with a lot of companies, kind of trying to help them out when they're in a bit of a mess. And we're going to be talking about one of those situations today. Welcome to the podcast, Jay.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So we all know that large projects and programs are ultimately going to fail. You were telling me off camera that you were recently reading a study where it was 95.5% of large programs fail, and I think that is just a really worrying stat, considering large means expensive, so a significant investment by organizations. So, Jay, we're going to be talking today about a particular set of a situation, a particular program that you're involved in. So maybe if we can actually, you could set the scene for our listeners, what were the key challenges the team faced and led them to need a recovery approach?
Sure, no, absolutely. So a large investment bank with quite a complicated technical estate, multiple moving parts, kind of legacy matrix management approach towards technology, trying to build a product or a set of, a product with a set of capabilities in the back end, which were quite involved and require a number of teams to be able to coordinate well, communicate well, collaborate well. And basically the idea was that they were going to come up with this great idea, a great product. They're going to work with these eight to 10 teams, and they're just going to deliver it in no time flat. The original timeline was about a year, and just after a year, we got a call from the CTO and said, "Hey, listen, things aren't going so well. Would you like to come in and have a conversation with us?"
Yeah, and things were, and what was going wrong? They weren't delivering frequently. There was just like amount of churn, requirements kept changing. They were spending money without actually seeing results. Everybody was unhappy. There was conflict. What was the situation? And obviously being appropriate, you don't want to offend anybody, but what was wrong? What was going wrong?
It sounds like that you were on the program with us, Dave. No, that's exactly right. So look, I think one of the biggest challenges that you begin to see when the cracks begin to show is that although the teams were supposed to be using a flavor of Agile, they were supposed to be using Scrum or Lean or something along these lines, there were lots of challenges around the understanding of what the teams were actually doing. So, agility gives you the opportunity to be able to kind of flex the approach based on your context. But it got to the stage where the teams weren't fully aligned on who was doing what and how they were doing it and how they were going to release. Planning was an issue, a major issue. So yes, we want to start quick. We want to be rapid in terms of our delivery. Sometimes though, when it's quite complicated and complex, with lots of moving parts, you do need to do a bit of thinking up front, just a little bit. We're not talking about months and months, but you do need to do some due diligence to make sure that you're building the right thing in the right way. And when you have the handoffs, the bottlenecks, the resource constraints, the team constraints, the capability constraints, all of that stuff coming in together, what you get is a large soup of challenges. And then suddenly you start to get missed opportunities, missed deadlines, slippage, costs. And I think the biggest frustration was that when you asked the management teams, the leadership teams, no one was really sure where the problem lay. So they weren't quite sure, well, how do we fix this big mess? We're trying to get this done. No one really knows. Where do we even start? So all of the usual things, right? And then ultimately, it's a revenue hit. You think to yourself, okay, this is going to cost us 15 million to deliver. 15 million very quickly becomes 25 million. You start to bring in expensive people to kind of turn things around. That doesn't work. So spiraling costs, spiraling budgets, deadline spiraling, and that leads to frustration. It leads to aggressiveness. It leads to culture degradation, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a bit of a mess.
Yeah, and it's incredibly hard when you've spent a year. If you got 10 teams for a year, we're talking, $3-4 million at least, at the minimum, and obviously if they work in the financial services sector, maybe double that. And you've sunk all this money, and it's not getting any better. So it's incredibly hard. I remember that I was talking to Ken Schwaber about FBI Sentinel, which is a sort of famous Scrum case study, and I was asking him about why they actually went to him and brought him in, and and exactly the same. That pattern that you described is exactly the same. What's interesting though, he added the bit those, and their stakeholders were armed. So the arguments were a little bit more scary because of that.
Right.
Obviously,
Yeah.
because they're FBI, agents, right? And I thought that was a funny addition to that. So okay, so if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're involved in a very large program, maybe a re-technology, a technology-driven initiative, or a business-driven initiative, or some sort of compliance initiative, or whatever that's driving, or new product that they're building that's driving 10 teams, 15 teams. What are the indicators, the early indicators, the signals that this program might be at risk? Do we have to wait for everything to be like blowing up and they're like, oh my god, it's so bad, we've got to call Jay? Or are there some early indicators that maybe they can get ahead of this pain?
That's a great question. I think a lot of the times when we come into these sorts of things, that's actually one of the first questions we ask, which is, how did you come up with the timelines? How did you come up with the roadmap? What kind of due diligence did you do to make sure that the timelines that you're proposing, and the budgets that you're proposing, hold water? A lot of the times, it's guesswork, and that's okay. When you're doing something new, which is complex and never done before, then you don't have a lot of data in terms of how you as an organization are going to perform. I think some of the other things that we see happening a lot is the number of moving projects happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So if you have 8, 9, 10 initiatives, all major initiatives, all sort of pulling on the same resources, the same teams, then invariably you're going to begin to choke some really important programs and projects, and while you give oxygen to another. So sometimes the organizational awareness of what we can actually deliver as a firm is not there. People haven't really thought through, uh, you know, how doing work in one area of the organization, especially when it requires so many different types of teams and people and resources and drains, is going to affect another part. And then what you tend to have happening is, because the organization doesn't know how well they're going to perform, as you begin to choke one program to feed another, you start to get this infighting, you start to get all of these sorts of challenges coming up. So there's an awareness of the firm, how good are we at delivering? Can we do multiple programs at once? Are our teams set up to win? So when you look at so that's the mission element in terms of the overall view of program delivery. The management piece is, do our managers understand the risks that are involved in the program? What are the challenges that our teams are going to face? And how do we, how do we kind of resolve them? Do we have the capability to resolve them? Do we know what the right approach is? And then finally, the teams themselves. For this particular program work that we're thinking about, I remember we had 10 teams dedicated to the work, but they were relying on a particular team which had a very specific skill set, and that team, already short-staffed, already overloaded, was feeding 10 other critical projects and programs. And so you've got 10 teams relying on this one bottleneck, And obviously it's going to start to break down, right? It's going to start to stall. And really what tends to happen is that tends to cause problems to stakeholders starting to infight. They've all got challenges. They've all got difficulties. They have to push hard for their program to work. So they're going to do what they can to free up resources, so to speak. And that's, you and I know that, that's probably not the best way to solve things, by fighting with each other.
Yeah.
The setup of the program, the way things are done initially, can give you the clues that, it's not going to be working well. And then there's the delivery element. If you're missing delivery dates, then something's wrong.
Mm. So the things that you said, just to sort of summarize, WIP, work in progress, when there's lots and lots of different things that are in progress at any one moment, that's a recipe for disaster, because as fabulous as human beings are, context switching is a huge challenge, and particularly if they're not all working together on that context switch, they're context switching at different levels, then you get this sort of like almost a prism effect of complexity. So you talked a little bit about looking at the flow, the delivery flow, and actually seeing how easy or how hard it is to deliver something. Because one thing that we have learned on large programs, and this was a great example of what's happened with the manned spaceflight program in the US between Boeing and SpaceX. Boeing, it's been a complete disaster. As everybody would know, Boeing have managed to strand two astronauts, one astronaut that lives in the town next to my town, actually, on the space station, because their product doesn't work. And one of the principal reasons, and there was many, but one of the reasons why SpaceX was so successful was because they had this unmanned space program continually delivering.
Right.
And so they learned so much, and they had the ability to test things on a satellite launch, or on a supply mission to the space station, or on and they had this sort of culture of continuous delivery, which then the programs just took advantage of, really, and so I think that's a really key point. Even though on a large program it almost feels impossible. I mean, you can imagine that launching spaceships is probably pretty challenging. But you actually, by doing it more frequently, you get good at it, and then that ultimately gives you the muscle to be able to do that. So WIP, delivery, frequent delivery, the planning. How did the planning process? So the reality of the planning, how detailed were the plans, and how comprehensive, and how were they formed? Maybe that can be an indicator as well. Interesting.
Yeah, and how do you manage risk? So a lot of the times in large firms, what tends to happen is that you have a risk team. So teams
Yeah.
themselves at the management layer, or even at the delivery layer, will begin to raise challenges and issues, and the risk team comes along and picks them up, and they put them in this beautiful ledger somewhere, and that's it. Right. So for this particular program of work, one of the first things we go and look at is, hey, can you show us your risk log? And lo and behold, over 700 plus risks, some P1 risks, which are sort of sink the ship type of risks,
Yeah.
surfaced in the first 3 months, and they've been aged. They've been there for like nine plus months. And so you think to yourself, well, okay, someone has had the foresight to raise this. Someone's done some thinking about it, which is cool, and that's what we want. But
Yeah.
what do we do with it? Well, it's in a ledger now, and someone over there who has no contextual awareness, is not technical, or doesn't understand the business in terms of what we're trying to deliver, is going to manage it somehow. How realistic is that? So I think also you mentioned WIP, but a lot of the times people tend to think about WIP from a team perspective only. So teams themselves should just be thinking about, oh, how many things should we be doing? We shouldn't be juggling multiple projects or programs. We should be laser focused. But what we find is, so when we come in, we always kind of think about the mission. And from a mission standpoint, leadership teams at the very kind of, who are leading the organization, they should be aware of how many of these big, hairy, audacious goals can we actually deliver in parallel,
Yeah.
right? and if you answer, because we love starting new things, right? There's a lot of energy that gets released when you start something new. It's fantastic. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of pomp and all this kind of great stuff, and it's really galvanizing. But you're doing that every 6 months. You're starting 3 or 4 new programs every 6 months. Very, very quickly, what tends to happen is the organization grinds to a halt.
Yeah.
So regardless of the the enthusiasm at leadership level, because their aim is to do good things and to achieve good things for the firm. If you start too many things and don't focus on finishing them, what very quickly happens is, regardless of how scary you are as a leader, and the size of the big stick you're waving around, the system just comes to a halt. So those things you mentioned about WIP, the value stream, and all this kind of good stuff, that awareness has to exist at the mission level. It's
Mm.
not just about the teams. It's not just about a management level. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
gone are the days when leaders could get away with not knowing anything about how their organization should be delivering.
Yeah. And it's interesting to talk about that whip at the sort of mission or executive level.
Yeah,
It is really, I mean, I run an organization, and and we do quarterly reviews, and it's really hard not to add new stuff every quarter. And and I'm very aware of the capacity of my organization to deliver value, and we do it incrementally, and we make progress. But the amount of times we've done an MVP, we've delivered something, we've maybe done the first release of something, got some interesting data, and then we've stopped because, oh, new bright shiny thing. and
right.
and and I see myself doing it, and it's really hard not to. And the best way of not doing that is to make things transparent, which I think brings us to what you did, right? It from my understanding, and from the when we talked earlier, it's about applying the Scrum framework, or a sort of blended approach, to actually facilitate the recovery, and transparency and all these things become a natural part of the organization, which helps them deal with some of these natural characteristics of large programs. So tell us a little bit of how you fixed it.
I think the thing is that what's great about Scrum is that, as a framework, and it's a framework, not a full-blown methodology for most people. Most people don't know that it's purposefully incomplete, and that sounds scary, but actually, what that means is that there's room for other good things to come in. So when we come into firms, and we do our kind of discovery process and learn a bit about how things are working and what's not working. What we tend to find is that what Scrum gives us is the ability to sort of coordinate and structure our collaboration. Um,
Yeah.
so I think probably one of the most powerful elements of Scrum is the retrospective. So 9 times out of 10, what we tend to do is, when we come in at a firm level, when we're working with the management teams, we're working with the mission level teams, the executive teams, and we're working with the teams themselves, one of the first things we'll do is we'll deploy a retrospective. So, and that's powerful, because what that will do is, it's not about coming in and just going, hey, we're just going to do Scrum and everything's going to be fantastic. It's coming in really kind of being a bit of a detective to learn about what are the challenges that people are facing, and then incrementally and intentionally fixing those challenges. Now, of course, we know that they should be doing good planning, that the roles need to be there, that we should be collaborating well and often, and that we should be structuring our collaboration. And most importantly, we should be retrospecting and learning as we go, rather than waiting to the end of a 2-year slog and then going, do you know what did we learn? And no one's interested. So a lot of the times we tend to work layer by layer. So again, the mission piece is leadership teams, executives. And with those guys and girls, what we want to do is we want to make sure that they understand their responsibility when leading a large program of work, that ultimately you're still accountable and you are still responsible for how the teams are performing. And if there's a challenge, you should be rolling up your sleeves to support and help them, rather than pressuring them to deliver faster, which tends to be, the standard way of doing stuff, right?
So let me see if I get this right. So I'm a little cross-eyed during your description, because what you're talking about, so Scrum Definitely, you can. Everybody knows how to. Well, not everybody, unfortunately, but many people know how to use it at the team level. To deliver stuff. You have a team, you have a backlog, you have a goal, product owner, scrum master, developers working together. Sprint, do stuff like that. But what you're talking about is applying Scrum at that executive level, or the mission, as you call it frequently. So you put in place the Scrum framework, and you instantiate it at that level, starting with a retrospective, which is interesting because you'd have thought you'd start with goal and work your way. So that's kind of cool. And the reason why you do that is because you're like, well, we need to understand what the major challenges are at that level. And then we blend that in with the mission, the goal or the goals. And then that then allows us to build this sort of executive cadence or leadership cadence. And then the actual teams obviously just do scrum, but then their retrospectives feed into that executive. So it's turtles all the way down. Is that right,
It is
Jay?
sales all the way down. We're about to do some work with another asset manager, and I'm glad you picked up on the fact that we start with a retrospective,
Yeah.
because what happens is that when you have everyone at a senior leadership level, at that executive level, knows what they're moving towards, right? But what tends to happen in the retrospective is that what we want to do is we want the system to reveal itself to itself. We want the people there to know, how are we actually working together? And are we working together? Are we actually going for the same mission? Invariably, what happens is that one executive will say, okay, well, the mission is this, and we're doing this, and that. And ultimately, because of that reason, you guys, I always find frequently, as we're going for the mission for the firm, my people are getting throttled, or, our resources aren't there, or the team that we're looking for isn't, has been pulled off by something which is inconsequential. And then you get someone else going, hold on a minute, Bob. What do you mean that this is the most important thing? Actually, no, I pulled off that team. And the reason we did that was because of this being the most important. Now, suddenly you start to see, okay, if we're not aligned at the mission level, if we don't understand the vision that we're going for, if we don't understand the purpose behind the different initiatives and how they dovetail together, if they dovetail together, then suddenly what we're going to do, if we're confused amongst ourselves, then how in God's name is our management teams, going to be aligned towards, a very certain future? So the retrospective actually is a very powerful tool to help leaders think through, what are we actually doing? Are we aligned in our goals? All of us at the leadership level. And leaders are force multipliers, right? When they fix a problem for one set of teams, those ripple effects tend to occur across the organization. Now, if you've got one chap fixing a problem and you've got somebody else undoing it somewhere else, you're not going towards a certain future. You're going towards a very uncertain, very shaky future. So those are the kind of things that we want to bring out during the retrospective. And that then leads us to an elegant way of asking, okay, guys, what is the mission? What are we trying to do? What are we not going to do in pursuit of this mission? Are we clear about, if we're going to go for this, then we're not going to do that? What is the opportunity cost? And these are hard conversations and they're hard decisions to make, but that's what leaders should be doing. Okay. So we don't have unlimited resources. We can do anything, but we can't do everything. So we need to pick very carefully what we're going to do and make sure the team at that leadership space, that executive space, is aligned around that, which is why we start with the retrospective. And not with, oh, come on, tell us the vision, guys, and let's go on with some planning straight into it. Let's figure out what we've learned. What are the good things that we've done, and what are
Yeah,
the not
yeah.
so good things that we've done?
I think that's really, really interesting. And then that frames the planning, the overall program
Exactly.
level
Now,
planning.
now
Yeah.
we can get behind it. Now we're all aligned around, actually. One thing that we did with this particular group was that we did a warm-up exercise within quotes. And for those of you who are familiar with liberating structures, you'll know this is called TRIZ. And we said, okay, look, how would we sync the firm, guys? And so we spent 15 minutes at a leadership exec level figuring out, okay, if we were the competition, how would we sync the firm? And they came up with all kinds of ideas. And the most devastating idea that they came up with was no unified sense of purpose, right? It was the biggest thing. If we do that, then we'll fragment the firm, we'll fragment our resources, we'll fragment our firepower, we'll fragment everything, right? And one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing. It's probably the most powerful thing we can do to derail an organization. And the final question is, okay, guys, so you've seen all this stuff, fantastic. You dot vote the most devastating behaviors, and then everyone gets another dot, and they go, tell us what we're doing in the organization right now. And at that point, the room went very, very quiet as these chaps start to think things through. And they realized that actually, at least 90% of these behaviors that we're seeing are the things that we are actually doing to derail our firm. And the cumulative result of that work is failure, right? And it took the CEO to say, do you know what, guys? Together, our intentions are good, but together, what we've actually created is a failing firm. And then that becomes the catalyst to, okay, let's make some difficult decisions. Let's put some stuff into the game. Let's figure this out. Let's talk to each other. Let's collaborate, because they mentioned collaboration wasn't great. They mentioned communication wasn't great. They mentioned coordination wasn't great. Okay, so now we have space to begin to attack those things and turn them around.
So it got going. Hopefully, that bottleneck team was the appropriate either support or prioritization or magic was sprinkled on that bottleneck team to allow them to not be so much of a bottleneck. We started increasing collaboration between the stakeholders aligned to a common goal. People often say, why has Scrum only got one product goal? Surely a product's got multiple product goals. And of course a product has multiple product goals. However, at any one moment it doesn't. And I think that consistency, that everybody's going towards one goal, and then that allows you, the most powerful word in any organization is no, right? Or not yet. Nobody says no anymore. They just say not now or not. I mean, that's basically how to make a successful marriage, I think, is never to say no. Just say, not now, I'm busy. Actually, I don't know if it is a recipe for success or not, but not now. And you can use the goal to frame those discussions and make those decisions, which then aligns the organization. So, all right. So we've started. We've now got a clear goal. We've sort of like made those problems very transparent. That at that sort of executive Scrum level, we're running through the process. How did it did it carry on in this sort of like regular cadence with reviews and retrospectives at both the team level? Yes, I guess it did there. But at the organizational level or at the mission level, did you continue that?
Yeah, what we found was that you have to adapt the framework at that senior level. So at the executive level, look, they're constrained in time. These people are very, very time poor, and they are running, a multi-million-dollar firm. They don't have time to do 15-minute conversations, and it's not really appropriate at that level. So have to. We kind of drop the daily down to two 15-minute conversations as a pulse check throughout the week, but the retrospective, the planning, and all these sorts of things remained in force. So we did that. The thing is, what a lot of people don't realize is that the fastest way to shift culture is for leadership teams to go first. And when managers look up and they see their leaders thinking about what's not working and how they can support, what they can do to eliminate friction, what they can do to eliminate challenges, how to get ahead of the teams and support them, and they're conversing, they're having those tough conversations, they're figuring out, they're changing, that effect then ripples down throughout the organization, right? So it's a very powerful cultural shift. Lots of people are talking about, how was it culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? But this is how you change culture. You change culture through tangible, visible behavior. So that's why it's so important. Leadership really is the difference that makes the difference. So it's one of the reasons why we start in that space. When you get down to the management space, what tends to happen is that managers also have a very specific focus. They are the folks that connect leadership vision, strategy, the reasons why the firm lives, with the mechanics level, the teams themselves, and the glue that brings the teams and the execution piece together.
Yeah.
And so we want managers to be, first of all, engaged and thinking about what it is we're doing and be knowledgeable about it. And I think one of the biggest myths in agility is that managers are evil, right? But on the flip side, you
Yes.
always hear that. I mean, when I was young growing up, the best people were the managers and the leaders that took time to invest in me and to teach me, to mentor me, to coach me, right? That's a real strong role for a manager. And that means they need to have knowledge. They need to know about the frameworks. No longer is it okay to just give it to the teams and not know what the right approach is. How are you going to mentor your guys, and how are you going to mentor your girls if you don't know what the right things? How are you going to coach them? How are you going to train them if you don't know? So the management layer, actually, and one of the things that we do is when we bring people towards this understanding and this realization that actually you're valid, you're needed, right? You're absolutely needed. What tends to happen is that we avoid this frozen middle. I don't know if you know about too much about this frozen middle, right? Where managers tend to scupper the change. We eliminate that change. We eliminate that scuppering effect. We eliminate that frozen effect by bringing people in and helping them feel relevant and needed, because they are, right? And they need to operate as teams too. So management teams, because they're working across the organization, and this particular organization had 50 plus teams. So 50 plus teams with management teams trying to get stuff done, because you can't just down tools. Okay, we're going to slow something else down. That's cool. It's a conscious decision. We're going to speed something else up. That's fine. Those managers have to help figure that out, right? And we want them to figure out. We want them to learn. We want them to run 15-minute events every morning. We want them to be thinking about what's the difference that makes the difference. Their backlog, by the way, is at an organizational change element. They're thinking more about, is the organization built in the right way? They're thinking about, what are the key risks that are affecting these multiple programs? And how can we work together to eliminate them? Which are the teams that are struggling? Who needs help and who doesn't need help? So coordinating those managers in that way makes a huge, huge difference.
So one of the first things that I did when I started running Scrum.org is I brought in this POW Essentials, Professional Agile Leadership Essentials. We couldn't use M because we were using that, so we had to use L for leadership, and it's very much focused at that frozen middle, and I personally, when we were betaing it and testing it and incrementally building it, I worked with a large pharmaceutical company throughout the US and Germany, delivering it because these people could be huge enablers for Scrum. And what was interesting, and you probably saw this as well in your situation, was they were so connected to the existing systems and processes that it was very important for them to understand that those needed to change to create the environments for the Scrum teams.
Yeah.
But nobody had often told them that they could change them, and that they were basically, they were expecting to do a PR review or this review or and they had all this existing, I don't call it waterfall, but traditional sequential project management process that they expected that they had to do. They'd introduced Scrum at the team level. The executives had got a really clear idea of mission and vision, and they were going to be all digital, and it was all cool, and it was all cloud and all that. And then this middle group were like, okay, they'd attended the meetings on both, but they had no idea what their responsibility was.
Yeah, where's my place?
Yeah, where do I sit? You've got the agile consultants telling them that managers don't exist in Scrum. Nice. Yeah. You got the executives saying, well, yeah, you make it happen with what, and then there was sort of like, it was really interesting. And I'm really grateful for that, 9 months, year that I spent at this pharma company running around the world delivering these training classes with different professional Scrum trainers, because I learned so much and really built an affinity. And I actually they made me feel, I felt sorry for them as well, actually, to be honest. So it's really, really interesting. So it's interesting you say that. So okay, so you've got these you've worked on with the middle management, you've worked on the executives, you've got, the easy bit, which is the bit that actually is people doing the work at the Scrum team level. You're driving up and down transparency across the organization. Anything else that we haven't spoken about, that
Yeah.
needs to be really important?
We didn't talk about the teams. So
Oh,
we've got
yes, I guess we should. The people actually doing the work.
yeah.
Yeah.
So look, if we just talk about, so the framework is mission, management, and the mechanics. And
Yeah.
so mission is that piece that we talked about right at the top of the conversation, which is leadership that changes everything. Leaders have to go first, right? Super important. We all know that, but we need to be able to show people what to do. So how exactly do we go first? And we have to be able to answer that how question. For managers, we want them to feel relevant and included, so that they're basically, they're in essence they're crushing barriers and uniting teams. That's in essence what they're doing, and they're doing it well. And so you have this cascade effect going all the way down, right? And then finally, you've got the mechanics level. You've got the teams themselves that are using scrums to kind of scrums to coordinate things, right? And that behind that, we're trying to build teams and people that are thriving in that delivery space. And when that happens, when you're working on trying to figure out, okay, what can we do to fix the organizational barriers and challenges? What you tend to find is you tend to open up that value acceleration. Now, we a lot of the times when we're going into firms, we talk about how we can get a program going 100% faster. But actually, some of our clients go 5x faster or 6x faster. We've had teams that have got a 6-month backlog and have crushed it in a month. And that sounds incredible. But actually, when teams are focused on eliminating the things that are stopping them, we talked about those bottleneck teams, right? One of the first questions that we asked was that, well, if you've got a team with a very specific skill set, which is serving 15 teams, what is the net effect? Yeah. What is the cost?
How are they prioritizing their work? What happens? Yeah.
It's obvious, right?
Yeah.
How are you thinking about what's important? Firstly. Secondly, why are you not, if that skill set is in demand, what's stopping us from bringing that skill set into the other teams? Is it time? And if it's time, then how can we, what can we do as leaders, as managers, as teams to share resources, start to go for those pie-shaped skill sets, multi-skill sets? What can we do? I think the other thing is that we bring in other approaches. Theory of constraints is a great approach. Value streaming is a great approach, right? What are the constraints that are stopping us from moving forward at a team level? And who do we give them? Can we as a team fix those issues? If we can, let's get on it. Let's fix them. And if we can't, then we pass them up to our management team, who are literally running around crushing barriers. That's what they live for, because we've given them purpose now, right? And they know how the organization works. They know how to get around those challenges. We did this with one asset manager, and they went from, we told you about the 700 plus risks. They got them down to about 50 risks, 60 risks, which in a large program, you tend to have a floating number of risks that you have to be, you don't go down to 0 risks, because that doesn't even
unrealistic.
exist. Yeah, it's not realistic. It's not real life. But you go to a scenario where things that are coming up are being passed up the chain of command or down the chain of command, depending on how you think about it. And you've got management teams doing that stuff. You've got teams themselves using blended approaches. So theory of constraints we mentioned, XP tool sets we bring in, professional testing. If you're in a software space, how can you test faster? A lot of the times we've seen, certainly in the asset management space, people will come in and they'll just bring in an army of testers, 30, 40, 50 testers. The worst we've seen is 100 plus testers trying to make it all happen. We come in, we bring in strong delivery processes, strong technical people. You hand that off to, say, for example, automation, and suddenly, boom, you don't need 100 testers. You just need 5 good guys and some BAs. So those kind of approaches, which Scrum really gives you that kind of space to bring in and coordinate with, that's really the difference that makes the difference.
Yeah, I think it's the point you raised, that most teams can deliver a lot faster. Than it's the environment that they're delivering into that is slowing them down. It isn't actually the problem solving. It isn't actually the building code if it's a software project, or testing it, or even deploying it. It's the environment that gets in the way of that. And they spend all their time dealing with the environmental issues, going to meetings, making sure that, as opposed to actually getting work done. and what you're doing in using Scrum, a very almost, I don't want to say a simple approach, but a very straightforward approach
Cascading. Yeah, it's a cascading, tells all the way
yeah,
down. Nice and
exactly. Turtles all the way down. Hey, I could talk all day about this stuff, Jay, as you well know, and it's super interesting because my personal mission is always about helping teams deliver stuff a little bit better and create an environment that fulfills their potential. And I think what you're describing is creating that environment at the enterprise or at the large program level. So I think we could talk for hours, but unfortunately we can't because we have a time box for our
indeed.
podcasts. And
Indeed.
so as we finish up, what we've talked about is really this idea of using Scrum as a fractal, almost applying it at many different levels in the organization and up and down the organization, creating that transparency, ensuring people know what they're trying to do, particularly in the area of middle management, making these, starting with retrospectives to sort of like frame the mission that we're on, etc. But if for our listeners, if you're listening to this today, how can what can they do? Maybe they're in a program that seems to be on a spiral to disaster. Is there any resources that they could leverage?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we always give to our current clients or clients that are working with us, we have a resource that we give out, which is basically all the principles that have helped us reliably over the last 20 plus years deliver our programs faster than ever before. So if you reach out to me at j@fractalsystems.co.uk, I'd be more than happy to pass it along. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. So it's J Rahman, and obviously it's Fractal Systems Consulting in London. If you ping me on LinkedIn or if you reach out to me, as I said, on email, my team will be more than happy to send that along. And that contains all our principles that we've learned over the last 20 plus years, helping firms deliver value faster than ever.
Cool. Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you for
Sure.
sharing this today with our audience, and thank you for listening, listeners, to today's Scrum.org community podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, share with your friends, and of course, come back and listen to some more. I'm a very lucky chap because I get to talk to a variety of guests talking about everything in the areas of professional Scrum product thinking. Of course, obviously today, I was with Jay Rahman talking about how do you deal with large programs that are on a spiral of disaster? How do you solve those problems and move those programs into the area of success, delivering value continuously, making stakeholders happy, and obviously ultimately delivering value to users. Let's stop that 95.5% of failed large programs. That's what we talked about today. So thank you for listening, and thank you, and Scrum on.